The new theater of the mind. The Bruce Collins Show.
Welcome back to the Bruce Collins Show. We're very glad to have you join us. Tonight we'll be talking with Dennis Stone about a very mysterious place that has been featured in the late Leonard Nimoy's In Search Of and talked about on shows like The X-Files. It is known as America's Stonehenge, a very unusual place, and Dennis Stone joins us to talk about his property. The Bruce Collins Show airs every Friday night at midnight right here at WWPR, 1490 AM. You can listen to past archives of the Bruce Collins Show at ipbn-fm.com. That's ipbn-fm.com. There's a tab just for the Bruce Collins Show on the Intrepid Paradigm, oh, I got that right.
You did.
Wake up, Bruce. On the Intrepid Paradigm Broadcasting Network website. Again, that's ipbn-fm.com. We would appreciate it if you're able to spread the word for our show by word of mouth, social media, or in whatever creative way you can. Also, we have a Facebook page for the Bruce Collins Show. Please like us there. And you can email the show at bruce_collins_show at AOL.com. Hey, listen, the Bruce Collins Show also has a YouTube channel. Visit YouTube, search for the Bruce Collins Show channel, subscribe, and catch all the latest shows on YouTube. Now, over the weekend, I was trying to take a look at an electrical outlet that wasn't working, and I inadvertently shocked myself. At the hospital, the doctor asked if I was incontinent, and I said, "Hello, North America, how do you think I got here?" The doctor says the effects of electrical shock will wear off in a few days, but I have to say that I'm feeling great and ready for the broadcast. And now let me introduce my co-host, Chad Miles. He is a former congressional candidate in Michigan and a military veteran and is the founder and executive director of Sling and Stone Outfitters, a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to helping disabled veterans experience the outdoors. You can find out more information on his website, chadmiles.com. He's radio's lethal weapon, Chad Miles. Welcome back to the program, Chad.
Hey, Bruce, and tonight, remember, we're broadcasting on WDOG.
WDOG. Okay, this is like the third week we've had to go through this. Let me guess. You promised your dog you would mention him on the show tonight.
Yeah, how'd you know?
Ladies and gentlemen, and to the management of WWPR especially, I sincerely apologize once again for my co-host giving out the wrong call letters tonight. Of course, it's WWPR 1490 AM, not WDOG. Okay. I have to admit, I'm intrigued, Chad. Do you talk to your dog?
Yes, I do.
And does your dog answer you?
He does, I do admit, but I have to read between the growls.
Read between the growls. Okay. By the way, I do have something serious to talk about, Chad.
Oh, really? You have a dog, too?
No, I don't have a dog. I have cats. Anyway, actually, I lost all of my finances recently.
Really? How did that happen?
I invested in some ant farms.
Are you serious? Everybody knows you can't talk to ants like they're dogs.
I wasn't trying to talk to them. More specifically, I was trying to sell ant farms on eBay. I live on eBay. Unfortunately, nobody bought them. Who knew that nobody wants ants in their houses?
Hey, Bruce?
Yeah?
You wouldn't happen to have any ant farms you're giving away, do you?
Chad?
Yes?
Do you have any news for us this week?
I'm glad you asked.
I am too.
As a matter of fact, I do. What is believed to be America's only hard-nosed gang, composed only of gay and transgendered African Americans, hopes to have its story told by filmmakers who emphasize the group's transition from fighters to entrepreneurs working to establish their own clothing line. According to a March report on Advocate.com, the gang originally organized for protection. "We going to get our respect one way or another," said one. Hails from the violent Washington, D.C. Trinidad neighborhood, and yet some of the 200 members in their teens or early 20s insist on stilettos, lipstick, and mascara, while carrying knives, brass knuckles, and mace. That's from the Advocate, March the 9th, 2015.
There's apparently only one thing holding Bruce Jenner back from joining that gang.
I think he's probably the leader.
He's white.
Yeah, that's true. Well, you know what? He might be able to correct that, too. Moving on. That's
sad. First of all, we don't condone anybody beating anybody up or bullying anybody because of the issues they're having. And I pray for people like that they would know God's love and get in a church where somebody could help them work through some of these issues. I don't hate anybody. We love all people, and there's a sin problem in this world that's not just in the gay community, it's in all communities, and the answer is Jesus Christ.
Yeah, sin is sin, by the way.
It is.
So, and isn't it amazing, this transgender thing has really come to the forefront in the news and the pop culture in the last year or so, 2 years, maybe longer. But that's such a tiny group of people in the world. I mean, let alone in just the United States population. It just amazes me how much of an emphasis how much of an emphasis is being put on that group of people.
Yeah, that's a good springboard, because emphasis is the word. It's interesting because if your eyes are open, and if someone's listening to us for the first time and they don't know that we're Christians, once your eyes are open to what the news is actually doing, you realize that they're reading from a script and it's telling you what you should believe.
Right, exactly.
And an example of that is, of course, the Bruce Jenner story and how he believes he's a woman, and he's going through, I guess, these surgeries and all of that. That is something that the news is pushing right now, obviously. It's so transparent. But then recently, a few weeks back now, as this show airs, there was a group that got together and they were drawing cartoons of Muhammad, and some Muslims tried to attack the group. Pamela Geller, who I've interviewed, was part of this gathering in Garland, Texas. And fortunately, the police stopped these two that were going to try to terrorize this group that got together. I mean, technically, all they were doing was creating cartoons, but I'm not sure I'm even for that per se. However, the main point I wanted to make is, on my news locally, they presented that from the get-go as this group was anti-Muslim, Pamela Geller is an extremist, and yes, these guys tried to, intercept the group, these Muslims, but this is an anti-Muslim group, it's a hate group, they're extremists and all of that. And so you can see when your eyes are open that the news media obviously is trying to pitch an agenda and trying to make you have an opinion. And they're very successful at it if your eyes are not open to that.
Well, and I'll tell you what, as far as them being successful, they've been very successful. And this incident is one glaring example. I'm seeing people on the internet whom I've known for a very long time and whom claim to be very conservative, basically blaming Pamela Geller for having this event.
Right.
And it's turned into a blame the victim thing, and it's really the intellectual equivalent of blaming a woman for getting raped because she had on a short skirt. And
Exactly.
It really boggles my mind that some people, now that I knew the news media would have that opinion, that doesn't surprise me at all. But to some of the people that I've seen repeating it, it really shocked me in a way, and it really surprised me, and it just shows the power that the media has these days to really influence public opinion. They're not informing people. They're not informing people so they can have an opinion. They're giving you an opinion,
right?
And that's the difference.
And would I do what Pamela Geller is doing? Would you and I host a radio show where we made fun of Muhammad? No. But, so I don't necessarily agree with that, but I agree with free speech, and I agree with people like Michael Savage and Ann Coulter who may say things from a conservative perspective that I wouldn't say, or somebody like Pamela Geller that would organize a cartoon convention where they make fun of Muhammad. Would I do that? No. But I'm for free speech, and just the fact that the emphasis is on Pamela Geller and the anti-Muslim group more than the two people who tried to go to Garland, Texas to kill these people, it bothers me that in America, that's the kind of perspective that the media has today. That's very troubling. Right.
It is. It's very troubling. And if this would have been a Christian event, just look at the television shows that make fun of Christians and Christianity, and the people in the entertainment industry and the news media, they kind of chuckle and snicker, that's fun. But somebody has this Draw Muhammad contest, and it's their fault that somebody tries to kill them. That's just it boggles my mind.
Yeah, and they talk about it's an anti-Muslim thing, it's hate and all of that. Pamela Geller's an extremist. Where are you, news media, on a daily basis when dozens and hundreds and thousands of Christians are being slaughtered in the Middle East? And you're worried about a cartoon contest.
Silence.
Exactly.
Absolute silence. So let's move on and lighten the mood a little, shall we? Mohammed Al-Mari, that's a total coincidence, by the way, age 21, was arrested on multiple charges.
We're not making fun of Muhammad.
Pardon me?
We're not making fun of Muhammad.
That's it. That was a coincidence. Was arrested on multiple charges in Tampa on April 12th after illegally entering a neighbor's apartment in a high-rise and forcing the owner onto the balcony. For reasons undisclosed in the police report, Al-Mari then allegedly microwaved the man's wallet in his oven. That's from Bay News 9, St. Petersburg, April the 12th.
That is strange.
He microwaved his wallet.
And I thought you were going to start that news story by saying, Mohammed Al-Mari, no relation to Tom Horn. Just kidding.
Microwaved his wallet.
That's right.
Joseph Williams, age 35. Why do they always put people's ages in these news stories? Have you ever noticed that?
They do.
Is that relevant? Sometimes it is relevant.
Not necessarily.
But I don't think it's necessarily always relevant to the story.
Well, only relevant in the fact that a 35-year-old ought to be grown up by now.
That's true. Joseph Williams, 35, and with several pending warrants, was arrested on April 5th in Fort Pierce, Florida, after entering the emergency room at Lawnwood Regional Medical Center and Heart Institute, demanding an enema and refusing to leave until he got one. That's from tcpalm.com.
I wonder if he was with that gang from Washington, D.C.
Demanding an enema.
I'm not leaving until I get the enema.
I'm gonna get my respect one way or another.
Yeah.
I'm gonna get my enema one way or another.
And we wonder why cops get a little bit testy.
Edgy. Right.
Oh, boy.
Okay. Moving on. According to witnesses questioned by the Jacksonville, Florida Sheriff's Office on the scene after shots had been reported at Murphy's Express gas station in March, one customer had fired at another, hitting him in the foot because he felt that the customer was staring at him while he pumped gas. That's from WJAX-TV.
Okay, that's it. From now on, I'm looking at the floor when
I'll tell you what, if I did that every time somebody stared at me when I pumped gas, I would have shot 50 people by now.
What are you saying, Chad?
I don't know. Maybe people like to watch me pump gas. Maybe I have
They're looking at me. They're looking at me.
Maybe I have an unusual technique.
You're not getting paranoid, are you? Everybody's looking at me when I go to the gas station.
I'll ask my dog about it next week.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, moving on. Among Colorado's legal contortions to improve mass murderer James Holmes.
Oh,
Okay,
yeah,
hold on. Let me start that over again.
Yeah, that's the guy that's in court right now for the Aurora.
The Dark Knight shooting. Among Colorado's legal contortions to improve mass murderer James Holmes' chance of getting a fair trial, officials in January called more than 9,000 people to choose its jury of 12, plus 12 alternates, who will somehow surmise whether the Aurora theater shooter was legally sane at the time he killed 12 and wounded 70. The 9,000 first had to complete lengthy questionnaires, with thousands returning for individual interrogation, and many for follow-up screening. Among the prospects the judge encountered was one man skeptical of the death penalty, except in the case of a zombie apocalypse.
Oh, yeah, he needs to be on that trial. Can you imagine?
I don't know much about this death penalty, but I'll tell you what, if there's a zombie apocalypse, you got my vote.
I've been listening to that my schoolie, and he tells me there's going to be a zombie apocalypse. And then the judge said, you meet some interesting people in this job.
And that was an Associated Press article, too.
And it almost makes you think, some of the people on the jury ought to be in the defendant's box. But that's amazing. 9,000 people were questioned to make a 12-person jury.
Right. Well, 24 if you count the alternates. But that's a lot of people.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people.
I would think you'd want the zombie apocalypse guy just for fun. Just to get
I would think the defense would say, yes, we want him.
Yeah. He's what you'd call like a wild card.
You think?
They'd be like, sir, you can't leave. We're deliberating right now. And he goes, I gotta go watch Steve Quayle.
He's got some hot tips.
I forgot to bring me my K-bar. There may be a zombie apocalypse today.
I was going to say he'd have trouble getting through the metal detector with his machete and his axe.
Yeah. He's either into like fringe stuff or he's into The Walking Dead a little too much or something. I don't watch that show, but yeah, exactly.
Maybe both.
I mean, to actually write that down and realize people in government are going to see that, it's like, we'll be checking on that guy eventually.
And you wonder, was he serious when he said it, or was it an offhand comment?
I hope it was a joke.
Because some people
believe that.
Serious. They honestly think it's going to happen.
Well, think about it. I mean, that is one of the pillars of the conspiracy, fringe element is they've been talking about zombie apocalypse stuff a lot.
Yes.
For years. So some people do take it very seriously. I mean, I don't know what that would mean, what is a zombie, but yeah, some people really get into that stuff.
I'll tell you what, I don't believe in a Walking Dead type of scenario where, people are really, they're dead and they're zombies. But I will say this, if you have seen the movie The Crazies that Brett Wagner's in, that was a chemical weapon. Yeah. Or a biological weapon that was accidentally released into the public, and that's why the movie's called The Crazies. People just kind of went insane and they just kind of tore everything apart. And that was kind of the idea with this biological weapon. We would release it somewhere, or somebody would release it somewhere, and the whole city would tear itself apart, and you wouldn't have to fire a shot.
Right.
I could see something like that happen. And then there's another movie. I believe it's called 28 Days Later, where it's a similar scenario.
Yeah.
So that's in the realm of possibility.
Right.
But it's like The Walking Dead. No, that's pure fantasy. But some people are really, really concerned that it's going to happen.
Yeah. Now, you said you could see where it would happen. But would you write that on your jury duty question?
No, I could see it happening, but that's far-fetched. That's a very far-fetched scenario.
Mr. Miles, I see here you're waiting for the zombie apocalypse.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. Was this guy serious when he said it? I mean, he brings this up in being questioned to be on a jury. You know, was he like joking around, or was he serious? Like, there might be a zombie apocalypse. I could see the death penalty with a headshot. I mean, is that what he said?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know.
More than zombies, I could see people, obviously, and this has happened since day one, possessed people. And my grandfather had some experience with people that were possessed. They don't move or behave like a zombie per se. Zombie to me is almost like a Frankenstein monster, but people are possessed.
They shuffle slowly and like, ooh.
Yeah.
Very low intelligence capacity. Not
to make the conversation dark, anyways. If your heart is on Jesus Christ and you're following Him, don't even worry about zombies or the demonic or anything like that in terms of you yourself becoming a zombie or being worried about it. Even worrying about horrible scenarios.
Well, if you're a follower of Christ or a believer in Christ, you shouldn't have a fear of a zombie apocalypse, but you shouldn't have to live in fear in general.
Yeah.
Some people are afraid to go outside. Some people are afraid to fly. Some people are just live in fear, or they have these fearful tendencies. And the Bible says that the Lord doesn't give us a spirit of fear.
Right.
We shouldn't be living in fear at all.
Right. And really the only thing that God responds to is faith. And so the currency of hell is fear. The currency of heaven is faith.
Right. And the Bible also says it is impossible to please God without faith.
Yeah. Exactly.
Without faith, it is impossible to please God.
Absolutely.
Looking for the Loch Ness Monster just got easier, Bruce, thanks to Google Street View.
Whew.
In honor of the anniversary of a famous 1934 photograph of a mythical Scottish monster, the internet search giant mapped out the iconic lake in all its panoramic glory. Viewers can explore above and below the surface of the lake, which extends about 23 miles, or 37 kilometers, southwest of the city of Inverness. Connected to the river Oich, the river Oich, River Oich, to the south, and the Bona Narrows to the north. Though the views are spectacular, you're not likely to catch a glimpse of the Loch Ness Monster. Called a living dinosaur by some, a sea serpent by others, Nessie has long been a part of Scottish folklore. According to Catholic legend, the creature was first sighted in AD 565 when St. Columba repelled a water beast after it had killed a man swimming in the Ness River leading into the lake. However, skeptics say the account is one of the many church myths about medieval saints battling monsters.
Wow, so Nessie is a Catholic legend. I never even knew that.
Yeah, that's actually the first account of the Loch Ness Monster, and it was, this priest said some things and kind of extended his hand like a Jedi, and the account says that it was like the monster was being pulled back through the water away from. It's a pretty interesting story, actually. If it's true or not, I don't know, but...
Was it St. Patrick that supposedly led the serpents out of Dublin or something like that?
That was in Ireland, yes.
Was that St. Patrick?
Yes. Okay.
And they think that was almost like a spiritual analogy, that when he drove the serpents out, that it became a myth about serpents as in physical beings, but that it was sort of a spiritual allegory or something.
Oh, I never heard that.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. Now, I do have one question about this story. When you said Nessie, were you doing your famous one-handed air quotes?
Yeah. Well, I guess I was. How did you know?
Just a guess. I actually may go on there and find that so I can explore the Scottish Loch just for fun.
And that you can go, it says you can go under the water too.
Oh, I would like to do that, but I don't want to drown.
That's interesting.
Maybe I'll
wear your scuba gear.
Maybe I'll put some savers on my fingers so I don't drown.
Some lifesavers.
Yeah, that's right.
I did it again.
Oh, the air quotes?
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, to all of our zombie friends, up next is Dennis Stone with America's Stonehenge. In a moment. Joining us this week is Dennis Stone. Grew up at America's Stonehenge and has been involved with the site for the last 55 years, and he has met a variety of researchers. He is also a full-time airline captain, and he has traveled extensively around the world to other ancient sites in Europe and North America. He has been on numerous television and radio shows since 1970, and when he is not flying, Dennis spends his time at America's Stonehenge, where his wife Pat manages the day-to-day operations of the site. Their son Kelsey, who is an engineer, has taken an interest in ongoing research. Dennis Stone, welcome to the Bruce Collins Show.
So thank you so much for having me on this evening, Bruce.
Well, it's great to have you on. Now, how did you first come across America's Stonehenge, and what were your first thoughts about it?
Well, actually, I probably was about 1 year old. It was back in 1955, 60 years ago this year, that my dad, Robert Stone, actually heard about this on a radio talk show, just like we're doing tonight. And the topic was about the stone ruins in North Salem, New Hampshire. My dad only lived about 8 miles away from the site, but had never heard of it. So it was quite a surprise to hear about these stone ruins in basically his backyard. And the name of the show was Yankee Yarns, and the talk show host was Alton Hall Blackington. It was a big radio station in Boston that's still there. They just celebrated the 75th anniversary 2 years ago. And he got quite interested in it because of that radio show. And coincidentally, a little while later, a week or two later, he was at a barber shop, and he picked up a magazine, and it was a New Hampshire Profile magazine, 1953, so the magazine was about 2 years old, and he's looking through it, waiting to have his hair cut, and there's a whole article about the same site that he had never heard of until he heard it on the radio, and then now he sees his magazine article, so he became totally hooked on it at that point. The following weekend, he was at a card game at my aunt and uncle's house. He used to play cards on Saturday night with a bunch of friends. He took the magazine out, the barber had given it to him, and he showed it to everybody, and my aunt and uncle said, you know what, we were there back in the 1930s when my aunt and uncle were dating, and they rode down there on bikes, and they thought they knew where it was. So the following weekend, my dad, my uncle, and my mom all went down there, and they were able to locate the place. So I was about 1 year old, so it's been with me basically since I was a baby, my whole life pretty much, so 60 years.
Now, you touched on it, but can you kind of tell us where exactly this is located? Salem, New Hampshire, is that correct?
Yeah, it's in Salem, New Hampshire. It's actually in North Salem, which is part of Salem, and we're about 40 miles north of Boston, and Route 93 goes right by us, the main highway from Boston going into New Hampshire, and we're about 18 miles from the ocean, and the closest river is the Spigot River, which is a tributary of the Merrimack River, which goes right out to the ocean. So we're about an hour from Boston, pretty much.
Do you know about William Goodwin and Mystery Hill? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, the name of the hill actually wasn't named, and when my dad got involved with the place, it wasn't on topographical maps with a name. All the other hills around here, like Providence Hill and Hog Hill and there's Spigot Hill, they all had names, but this one did not have a name. So my dad, when he went to the place in 1955, he went up my family, they went up top of the site, they visited it, and he just totally was taken by the place. And he said when he came out, there's a chain link fence that was put around it in the 1930s by Mr. Goodwin, as a matter of fact, and it's still there today. It's a 6-foot-tall chain link fence with barbed wire on top of it, and it's still intact after all these years. And Mr. Goodwin put it up there to protect the site from vandalism and, people going in there messing up the place. And so my dad had to climb under the fence in 1955 to actually go into the site, so he kind of snuck under it. And I guess they were all trespassing at that moment. But when he spent some time in there and came out, my aunt and uncle and my mom were there waiting for him, and they said, "What do you think?" He says, "Wow." He goes, "It's amazing." He goes, "I'd like to someday maybe open this place to the public. I'd love to own this and do research on this site." And everybody said, "You got rocks in your head." But the place really didn't have a name at that time. People called it the Great Stone Village. Some people referred to it as Paddy's Caves. There was a family that was there from 1734 into the 1800s, so one of the names people used was Paddy's Caves after the Paddy family. But when my dad opened the place up 3 years later, he opened it up as Mystery Hill Caves. And by 1963, they dropped the word caves because caves kind of indicate or kind of implies natural cabins in the rock or, you know, that kind of thing. And these are all man-made structures, so the word caves was dropped. But the American Caving Association, I think, still kept this on as artificial caves, man-made caves, if you will. So the name actually was Mystery Hill for my dad, and that was the name of the business. And that name was is still actually the name of the hill today. And Mr. Goodwin was actually the first researcher. They referred to him as an antiquarian. He was an insurance millionaire from Hartford, Connecticut, a very prominent family out of Hartford. And he was interested in where did Columbus land, where did the Vikings, if they did come over here, where did they land. He was also interested in Native American mounds, which are thousands of them across, you know, the countryside, North America. And in his line of work, they sent him out to Ohio where he saw some of these mounds. He was in Seattle, Washington. And when he got back to the East Coast, he started hearing about these stone structures, and that got his interest. And he met a Mr. Pearson, Malcolm Pearson, who just died a couple of years at the age of 99 years old. And he was the guy my dad bought the site from. Because when Goodwin died in 1950, he willed the site to Malcolm Pearson. And Malcolm was the one that was doing all the photographs. He was a professional photographer, and he introduced Mr. Goodwin to the site. So the name of it's actually, today is America's Stonehenge. And in 1959, the second year we were open to the public, the Saturday Evening Post did a feature article on us. And we still have that in our museum today on display. And they refer to it as Stonehenge of America because of the huge stones that are used to build the site. They compared them to Stonehenge. They did not know at the time that the site had astronomical alignments of the sun and moon and stars. That wasn't until the late 1960s, so they're kind of ahead of themselves. So that was a nickname for many years, America Stonehenge. But 1982, they actually changed the name to America Stonehenge. And the name of the hill, again, still on topographical maps, is Mystery Hill. So that's how all the names came down. And some people still say, "Oh, those Paddy Caves," you know, that's still around a little bit too in the Great Stone Village.
Fascinating. Now, I know this area has been featured on In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy, in William Shatner's TV show Weird or What, and also it was briefly mentioned in X-Files. So it's a source of great interest over the years. Is there any idea of who could have built this site and for what purpose?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. Who were the builders of the site? And that's the research, like I mentioned, has been going on since the 1930s, actually, over 80 years. And even at the turn of over 100 years ago, at the turn of the century, there was a book written by Edgar Gilbert, and it was called The History of Salem. And in that book, they kind of wondered the same thing, you know, about these strange stone structures and the rough, they called it stone structures and the soft pine trees. I forget how he put it. It was very poetic. And he talks about this site, and it was written in 1907. And by the 1930s, the research work went on. And Mr. Goodwin's first impression was that the site might be a Viking site. But he hired a crew of people to go up there to survey the site, put up the chain link fence, and also to start cleaning the site. It had a lot of debris and brush, and as they began uncovering the site, he realized it didn't look like a Viking site. It didn't have sod houses, and it just wasn't arranged like a Viking-type site, nor did the artifacts seem to indicate that. His next thought was that it might be Irish Caldy monks from Ireland that built it. And he died in 1950 still believing that the Irish Caldy monks had built our site, and he thought it was a monastery, and he thought probably they were coming out of Ireland sometime around the 6th century A.D., and they were coming across the Atlantic Ocean to spread the word of Christianity, also to escape some of the Viking period, which went from about 800 A.D., trying to escape some of the Viking, the raids and everything, you know, for religious purposes. They came over here, and they're trying to find some sort of sanctuary, and also to instruct the Indians, try to convert them to Christianity, that kind of thing. So he wrote several books. One of them was called The Ruins of Great Ireland and New England, and The Truth About Leif Erikson, and he had a lot of other things he wrote and he put out. But his idea was that the site was an Irish Cody monk monastery, approximately somewhere around 1,000 years old, a little bit older than that, I guess. Today, because of carbon datings and the astronomical research and study of inscriptions and a lot of work on other sites that compared to ours, the size, shape, and the orientation of the structures, you can find a very similar type structures over in Europe. And we believe today is about 4,000 years is the date of our site, not 1,000 years like Mr. Goodwin, because of the carbon dating and the astronomical research. So today we think it's a much older site than Goodwin thought. We think that people did come from possibly across from the Mediterranean area. And in Western Europe, there are about 50,000 megalithic sites, Stonehenge being the most famous. But megalithic sites are in Spain, Portugal, or all around the Mediterranean. We visited them in Malta. We've seen them in England, Ireland, we went to Scotland. They're in 2,000 in Ireland alone, but they continue into Russia, they go into China, and right into Korea, actually. There are about 120,000 megalithic sites originally. Today, I think there's about 70 or 80,000 remaining due to modern development has wiped out a lot of them. And they're in South America also. There's very similar types of structures that you can find in Portugal, you can find them in Colombia, South America, you can find them over here in the Northeast, from Canada right through New England into the Mid-Atlantic states. There's dolmens, there's standing stones, there's structures, that kind of thing. So we think, we haven't proven it yet, we think people are coming across the Atlantic Ocean about 4,000 years ago, and were involved with the construction of our site as well as others in the Northeast, perhaps.
Now, if you mentioned this, I might have missed it, but were there any bones found on the site?
Yeah, there's been some bones, but there chamber. It's sort of a satellite chamber. It's located away from the main site. It's the first structure you'll see on a tour of our site. We have a tour guide map, and when you're outside of a visitor center, that's the first stone structure you'll come to. There's about 50 of that same design in New England, actually. A large glacial boulder on the right side, and a structure built around the glacial boulder. And during the 1950s, we were doing a couple of excavations, and they found a piece of bone, and it was sent to a museum, and their best guess at the time was that it was possibly bison bone, buffalo. And we also found a stone pendant and a bone pendant, another piece of bone, that had little drill holes in them, and it might have been used as, like some sort of like jewelry or something that, somebody would wear. And these were on display in our museum. The little stone is a little triangle piece of stone. It's very flat, like a piece of slate or something. I forget the material it's made out of. But they were found in the watch house. But the soil in New England usually dissolves, it's very acidic, will eat up bones in about 300 years, 400 years. And our archaeologist says even up to 1,000 years you may find some bones preserved in New England, but after that they pretty much decompose because the soil has so much acid in it. And also the animals love to gnaw on bones too. So we haven't found any bones that would be from like any human remains that would go back to the time period of, say, 4,000 years. But some of the chambers up there do look like the burial tombs of Europe. When Mr. Goodwin came along and they cleaned out the structures, they may have removed evidence that some of these structures could have been used for tombs. They would take the soil today and analyze it for certain chemicals, and they could probably tell that, yes, at one time it may have been a burial site, But unfortunately in the 1930s they didn't have that technology, and they just basically dug, cleaned, and looked for artifacts, and then they threw the soil away. So they kind of destroyed some of the evidence back then, 80 years ago. Fascinating.
Now, you touched on this, but can you expand on the alignments? And I understand they include cross-quarter days?
Yes, we do have astronomical alignments. It started in 1967. 2 years before that, the CBS special Stonehenge came out, and that was based on the book by Gerald Hopkins, Stonehenge Decoded, that came out, I think, in 1963, if I remember. And that book became very popular. It drew a lot of attention to Stonehenge, and particularly because of the astronomical alignments of the sun and moon. And even Mr. Goodwin back in the 1930s knew that outside the main site, which is about 1 acre where most of the stone structures are located, there's about 20 acres of walls and standing stones. and he didn't have the time, the resources, nor probably the technology to actually determine what these things were, but he knew they were there. And it wasn't until 30 years later, in the 1967, that we became interested in seeing that these stones might have a purpose. So they began clearing out some of the avenues, and you have to clear, or on a big hill, it's all covered with a forest today, and you had to clear out somewhere around 500 to 700 feet of trees, wide enough so you can actually see the sun rise or set over a particular marker stone. And the first one we chose was one in the southwest, and we thought it was pretty close to the winter solstice sunset. And unfortunately, the weather didn't cooperate until December 21st, I believe it was, in 1970, 3 years later. We were standing, it was my dad, myself, a friend of mine, my neighbor, and the manager of our museum, and we all went up on the top of the hill in snow, and we got up there, and we waited, and the sun actually, the weather cooperated, and the sun set right over the top of the stone. And we thought at the time, boy, I don't know if anybody's ever seen this since the original builders, thousands of years ago. It was pretty amazing, actually. And from that point on, we realized that we might have astronomical alignments, so we began clearing some of the other alignments to different standing stones. And by 1973, we realized we had to have a professional survey team come up and survey all these standing stones, the site, and the walls that surround us, and make a very accurate map. And then from there, we could determine whether we had alignments with the sunrise, sunset, moonrise, and moonset. And by 1977, it was a slow process because we had to pay as we went along, raise some funds to have the survey work done and then all the computer work done. And they sent the information to the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics in Cambridge, Massachusetts. That was in 1977. And the results were that if these stones were used for that purpose, for some, as an astronomical site, they don't work today, but they would work about 1800 BC, so 3,800 years ago, plus or minus a couple hundred years. And in 1971, the oldest carbon dating on the main site we were talking about was about 4,000 years old. So 6 years later, we have the results of the astronomical research, and both dates agreed that around 4,000 years ago, that the site was being used and built probably as an astronomical observatory. So we have alignments with the quarter days, which are your spring, summer, winter, and fall, and the cross quarter days, which are days in between, such as November 1st, November 1st, August 1st, February 1st, and May 1st. Some of these are well known, like May Day. We used to have May fairs in this country, and the Maypole, and they still celebrate that in Europe, I think, somewhat. And the Russians would bring out their military hardware on May Day. So it's a very, very ancient celebration that some people still celebrate today. It's known as Beltane by the ancient Celts, or Beltane. And they built the fire as a Beltane. Well, we have a marker stone for that. That's a gigantic one. It's triangular, and it's almost 10 feet in length. It has fallen on its side. We have them for November 1st, which is All Saints Day, the day after Halloween, All Souls Day. And there's a stone marking that. And for the August 1st, which isn't too well celebrated today, but these actually mark the beginning of seasons. The beginning of fall would be August 1st. The end of fall would be, November 1st would be the beginning of winter. And by December, that would be midwinter solstice, sunrise or sunset. And then February 1st would be the end of winter, and we have a February 1st alignment also, the beginning of spring, and then March would be, the 20th would be spring equinox, and the end of spring would be in May Day again, so going right around. So we divided the year into 8 parts, and we have all those stones that align with the sun during those particular days for sunrise and set, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. I understand Dr. Barry Fell, he did some deciphering of some of the stones. What did he find?
Yeah, he first came to our site in 1975, and he had been in Harvard University for 20 years. He's from New Zealand originally, and he got his education, I believe, in England. And he was a epigrapher. He could translate and read ancient scripts like Minoan, Linear A and B, Libyan, Phoenician, Celtic script, and I believe Egyptian hieroglyphs. I think he had a working knowledge of that also. But he came to our site in 1975, and we had stones that had been found in a structure called the Chamber in Ruins in 1964, 11 years before that. And we put them on display for 11 years as unknown markings. We had no idea what they were. And we asked people, we had researchers looking at it, as people were taking a guess as to what they could be. But Barry Fell came along, and he was able to translate them. And one of the stones was Phoenician, and it said that chamber was a sun temple dedicated to Baal by the Canaanites, or Baal by the Canaanites. The other one was written in Libyan, but it was busted. The stone was busted, and so only part of the script is there. So he wasn't able to do a complete translation of that, but it was Libyan, Phoenician, and shortly thereafter we showed him some other stones, and he found what he says is Celtic, ancient Celtic Ogham, or Oham as they pronounce it. And he believed the reason that we have these three different languages is because it came out of the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal, and it was a melting pot for many cultures, including Phoenicians. The city of Cadiz, or Gades, was a Phoenician city. The Celts were in there, and the Libyans were right across from the, Rock of Gibraltar almost, and they were also in Spain and Portugal. And the style of the writing seemed to come from that area of the world. So, and from Maine all the way down to Brazil, they found, according to Barry Fell, Phoenician markings, as well as even out west of the Milk River in Alberta, Canada, Celtic markings. And there's other Libyan markings that have been found too. Very controversial. I don't know, in the future if people will find that how accurate his interpretation is, what's the final verdict on what he did is kind of what I'm wondering,
Yeah.
But it's pretty interesting, though. Very interesting.
Very interesting. Now, I understand that there's something that is called a sacrificial table there?
Oh, yes, yep. That's one of the main features. That's a great question. It's a large table. It's bell-shaped, actually. It's about 9 feet by 6 feet at its widest point, but it looks like a bell if you look down at it, shaped like a big bell. And on the surface of it's a rectangular cutout. It's a groove, actually, rectangular shape. And the groove is maybe 6 by 4 feet, something like that. And it does have a runoff, or runnel, at the end of it. And the stone is orientated just like the rest of the site. Our site is orientated out of true north, not magnetic north, north, south, east, and west. So most of the walls of the chambers and also the sacrificial table is orientated out of true north. And it's actually orientated east and west. And it weighs about 4.5 tons, so 9,000 pounds, and it sits up on 4 legs. And where the runoff is, the little runnel is to the west side of the stone, if you will. It goes into where a cutout in the bedrock is perfectly right underneath that, where that is. And you could either set a base in there, or the fluid would just go into that cutout in the bedrock. It's a very interesting feature because it's adjacent to the largest chamber that still exists at our site, called the Oracle Chamber. And the Oracle Chamber is almost just under 30 feet long, and it runs north and south. It does have an east branch that runs true east, and that goes about almost 20 feet. And the east branch is kind of interesting because inside the structure, when you're standing there, it has core building in it. The inverted staircase kind of building technique.
Right.
It's almost like an arch, but it's kind of cool, yeah.
Amazing.
And that structure there has a stone seat that's been carved. It's a big one. You put a couple people side by side in the stone seat, and that seat faces one of the several, I guess you call them stone closets, where they might have put some sort of an offering. It's a pretty good-sized closet, actually, and we have a couple of them in that chamber. There's a chimney flue at the north end of that chamber that had stone louvers in 1958 when we opened. Unfortunately, somebody got in there during our first season and stole the 2 stones. We still have photographs. Mr. Goodwin photographed them. Actually, Malcolm Pearson did back in the 1930s, and we have photographs when we first opened. So we know they were there. They really did exist, but somebody stole them, and who knows where they went. It has a deer carving inside the chamber. It has an arrow carving inside the chamber. And it also has this most interesting thing is a horizontal tube that goes through to the sacrificial table. It runs about 8 feet through a wall. Just below the tube, where you're standing inside the chamber, there's a step. So if somebody 5.5 feet tall, roughly, by standing on that stone step, it's part of the bedrock, actually, could put their face into this tube and yell, and the voice will come out underneath the sacrificial table. And it's all really designed like an oracle kind of. When people are above watching a ceremony, there's actually a stone platform on the west side of the table above it where people could stand and observe maybe a ceremony, and then a voice would come out, and they might think it's a deity or some spirit talking to them or something like that. Wow. So it is pretty amazing. I've been to the Oracle at Delphi in Greece, and I've also been to Malta, and it had similar kind of things over there, very, very similar. And it's almost like the Wizard of Oz kind of thing.
A lot of people might look at this and say, could the Native Americans have built this? What do you think?
That's a great question. We know Native Americans have been in New Hampshire, our own state, and in the Northeast too. Many, many years before our site was built. In fact, it was built 4,000 years ago. We have a site in New Hampshire up in the White Mountains, and it wasn't long after the glacial period when the conditions are still pretty brutal. They found evidence of human activity up there, not too far from Canada, actually, and it was about between 10 and 12,000 years. It's a paleo time period, they call it. And so we know human beings were here in New Hampshire for between 10 to 12,000 years ago, which is pretty amazing, right after the glacial period ended. And we know Native Americans were on a hilltop. We have a glacial clear to the west side of our property. It overlooks the Spigot River, and we found pottery in there. And the pottery is, we have one of the pieces was a very large bowl made out of clay, and the style of it goes back between 2,000 and 2,500 years old, Middle Woodland period pottery. Down near our parking lot where visitors come today, we found in 1995 a wigwam site. Found the marks in the soil. It was about a 30-foot diameter wigwam. We found grease from cooking still in the soil. And they also found two fire pits, and one dated about 2,000 years old and the other one approximately 1,700 years old. So that area may have been used for quite a long time as a habitat. So Native Americans were on a hill. And that's been a big question. Did they get involved with the construction of the site? Did they do it by themselves? Or were people coming in from Europe and Native Americans either, befriended them or maybe they were not friendly with them? We just don't know. That's been a great question. But there are names all over New England that are Native American names, like mountains, rivers, valleys, and gorges, that are not only Native American with a certain meaning, like Merrimack River, Amistad River, Lake Nephemagog up in Vermont, Portakichi Gorge in Vermont. The Barry Felses, these names are not only Native American with a certain meaning, but they're also Gaelic. The same word on the other side of the ocean with the same meaning. And I suppose you could say it's coincidence, but you can only have so many coincidences when you start to, there may have been diffusion or spread of ideas from elsewhere, and Native Americans may have assimilated. Now they're doing DNA testing and stuff like that. There's a lot more to it, but so he has place names, he has the inscriptions, we have the style of construction. It seems to indicate people did come and visit these shores from the western part of Europe, perhaps, around the Mediterranean and Western Europe. So Native Americans were definitely on our hilltop. And it's like a layering of cultures, actually. Our oldest fire pit, by the way, up there, was 7,300 years old. And it doesn't date the site, but it shows on our hilltop somebody was up there. We would call them a Native American, and they were up there building a campfire. And it was right near the North Stone. Wow,
if only we had a time machine and we could go back and find out what was going on back then. Before you go, tell us where can we find you online?
Website is StonehengeUSA.com, and when you go to that, there's a email address. Also, there's a phone number, and it has our everything basically about our hours of operation. We're open every day from 9 to 5, and we're open every day of the year except for Thanksgiving and Christmas.
Dennis Stone, he's talking about America's Stonehenge, StonehengeUSA.com, Salem, New Hampshire. Dennis, thank you so much. This has been fascinating.
Well, Bruce, thank you so much for having me on. I really enjoyed talking to you this evening. I hope your listeners enjoyed it too. And if anybody has any questions at all, they can go to that website, and we'll be glad to try to answer the questions if we can. And again, thank you so much for having me on this evening.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Bruce Collins Show, where you can find us every Friday night at midnight here at WWPR 1490 AM. Remember, God loves you. We do too. Don't give up.